Today is Monday, January 31st, 2011. My name is Mark Depew, the Director of Oral History with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. Today I've got my second session with Scott Blumberg. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good. And as we recall, and if you listen to the first session, it was all about Scott's involvement with what we would call the War on Terror. And we just got done with the point of some interesting circumstances as you're about ready to head out to Kosovo with a brigade from the 101st Infantry Division. And the circumstances that you talked about is your wife was pregnant and she started to have some complications and she was placed on bed rest. How many months left in the pregnancy?
She was, so this was our second child, and she was 27 weeks along. And the doctor wanted to make sure she made it to 34 weeks, I believe. Between 34 and 36, somewhere in there before she would lift the restrictions. So I think once she got to 34, a lot of the restrictions were less severe, less strict. So it was about 7 weeks she had to go with bed rest while I was gone. And just to clarify, I had talked to her about that in between these two interviews, and she... we went over try to make sure I remember this all accurately. There's apparently a difference between preterm contractions and preterm labor, and when I was looking through my journals too, she did not dilate, so it was considered preterm contractions. But anyway, either way, she was on bed rest while I was gone. She was not yet in what they call labor, though. That was the concern, was that they didn't want her to go early. So actually, when that all happened was the night that I was leaving for Kosovo with our unit. And I went from the hospital where she was at, and they had given her some medication to stop the contractions, but she was still there, and her mother was in town with our son at home. So I went straight from the base hospital to where my unit was waiting in kind of a holding area. And we didn't both have cell phones, and I couldn't have brought a cell phone with me anyway. So there was, trying to get the communication and how things were going, and all that. It was just tense, and she was mad at the Army at that point because it was not. I think I mentioned to you that was not considered enough reason for me not to leave with my unit that next morning. So. Yeah.
She didn't understand that wasn't enough reason?
She felt that should be enough reason for me. And they have specific reasons that they would bring someone back from a deployment for family emergencies or death in the family, things like that. And I think, if I remember right, I think preterm labor might have been enough to hold me back. But anyway, from their qualifications, it was not enough reason for me not to leave that next day.
How many other optometrists were assigned to the brigade that was deploying?
I was the only one, yeah.
If you had been let back, who would have gone in your stead?
I don't know the answer to that. Probably the other optometrist that took the second half of the rotation would have done it, I imagine.
Okay, was that one of the reasons that they were less willing to make some accommodations for you?
Maybe. Yeah, all of us, I'm sure, and I don't really see the inside details in how those decisions are made, but I think if you have a position that is less easily replaced, it probably does impact those decisions. I really don't know for sure.
Putting all of those complications aside, how did you personally feel about the validity of the mission?
I learned more about Kosovo when I got there, and it's kind of embarrassing to say, but it wasn't the most relevant thing to me going into it on why we were going or if this was a worthwhile place to even be for American soldiers. So there definitely is some truth to the, ours is not to question why, ours is just to do or die. And it wasn't the do or die thing, but it was, here's your job and you're going to do it. So it wasn't really any value in trying to determine, is this a wise use of American resources or not for us to be in Kosovo. So that was not part of my thinking. Now, when I was over there, as well as over in Iraq, you have a lot more time away from family and away from your daily, at least for me, a lot less time of my daily requirements that I got to do this around the house, or I got to spend, I was spending time with the kids or my wife and different entertainment things, and so you have a lot more time on deployments to start thinking more the philosophical questions of what's the point of being here. So I didn't even, I knew the geography of where I was going. I knew the background. They gave us some briefings on the different people groups, languages, and beyond that, and a little bit of the background on why I had gotten to the point where it was with Americans and NATO needing to be there.
Can you go into some of that?
Yeah.
The background history of it?
So my understanding of it, and these with Kosovo, these conflicts really run really deep. They go back, in the Turkish Empire, the Ottomans, and there's been this area close to Macedonia that's in disputed territory of, Albania feels that it's part of their region, and Serbia felt it was part of theirs, and neither side is willing to accept the other one being on their turf. So, and there's definitely a religious component to it as well. And anyway, what I understood of it was that it had gotten to the point where the Serbians under Milosevic had kind of been the ruling party, and were trying to and maybe express their control over the Albanians who outnumbered them. And the Albanians, in turn, were beginning to take over in government after Milosevic had been taken out. NATO had come in, and I think Clinton had authorized bombing and trying to stop.
Yeah, that was in March through June of 1991, that the UN bombing of Serbia.
Right. So then they were, the goal was to try to make it more of a democratic society with elections, and this would really turn the tide to the Albanian side because they outnumbered them. I think it was like 8 or 9 to 1.
Okay, you're talking about Albanians within Kosovo.
Right, so there's people groups, there's the country Albania, but then there's the people group Albanians who are in Kosovo, and then same thing with Serbia and Serbians. To the south would be Albania, and to the north would be Serbia. All this was a breakout from the Czech Republic. Yeah, so Serbia's up in the top and Albania down here. Well, that region of Kosovo was definitely a disputed area.
Well, you said that was a breakout of the Czech Republic. You mean Yugoslavia?
Yugoslavia, I'm sorry. Yeah, Yugoslavia. So anyway, they were moving towards trying to have general elections and making a government that represented the people. And it was really tense because the Serbians felt that they were going to be, because they're such a minority, that they were really going to be mistreated by whatever government took its place of Milosevic's government. And that's probably true. Probably there was certainly, when I was there, I saw a lot of hatred from the people that live there for each other.
In terms of how you guys were prepared, and this is a peculiar question, and your assumptions, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys?
The natural bent that I have would be, if I was to, and I really couldn't in this case, but if I were to say what my initial thought is that the Christian side would be the good side and the Muslim side would be the bad side, just from my own background and thinking. So the Albanians would be the Muslims and the Serbians would be the Christians.
Orthodox Christians.
Orthodox Christians, yeah. Eastern Orthodox, right, yeah. But Christian nonetheless, yes. It's very different, well, somewhat different from our own form of Christianity, although there's a lot of similarities.
Are you saying that because of your strong Christian faith at the time? Or
I think
because
Americans in general would probably more tend to side with the Christian. If there's two sides, they would tend to side more with the Christian side than Muslim side. But it's not, the Muslims in Albania and Kosovo, from all of my experience, which is fairly limited, were not the same type of militant terrorists that we think of with like aggressive, like Bin Laden's group. So that didn't really hold true. That I think both sides were just opposed to each other, but neither side was necessarily into terrorism or using civilians as targets, those type of things. So I don't really have a side on this one.
Okay. And would that be the official Army position on it as well?
Definitely, the official Army position was. And the Army, well, they were really, in their briefings, they were very, maybe to the point of extreme in that whatever your religious belief is, don't let that play into your feelings on this one, because this is not about religion. And I think maybe for that reason that they want to make sure that their soldiers that are, if anything, more likely to be Christian than Muslim, that they don't take sides too. So.
Well, if it wasn't about religion, what did they tell you it was about?
Territory. And from all I know, I think that's true.
Yeah, this had been disputed territory. The Balkans had been fought over since the beginning of time, certainly since the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and going back and forth, but even much deeper roots than that. And so you have this ugly patchwork of different ethnic groups, different religions, different countries, and lots of tradition of atrocities that go back for centuries as well, and especially got nasty during the First World War and into the Second World War when Tito created this nation out of this disparate group of ethnic groups and religions called Yugoslavia. But that all came unraveled about 10 years before you got there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Russia had, I think, or the USSR had, I think, just kind of kept those battles within their Eastern Bloc countries at bay because of their control. And once the Eastern European countries broke free from the Soviet Union, and some of those tribal disputes that had been simmering beneath the surface, at that point the central government wasn't able to keep these tribes from conflict. And so I think more than likely, whenever the UN would leave, probably this would all flare up again. And I don't know that there's enough time for the UN to actually accomplish getting them to like each other. It seems pretty open-ended.
It's significant that you mentioned UN. Was the United States, did you understand you're part of a UN peacekeeping mission?
Yes, we had, there's a very important badge that we got when we got to Macedonia. We flew into Macedonia, Sturpsi, I think was the city, Skopje. Is where we flew, and there's a camp called Camp Able Sentry is where they would receive you. Anyway, the second most important thing that you held as far as sensitive item, the first would be your weapon with its, the armed weapon, but the second thing would be this badge, and it was a KFOR badge, which is a Kosovo Force badge, that every country that had soldiers there all had these badges that it was like a passport in Kosovo that you could go to any of the regions in Kosovo, and each region was controlled by a certain country or a group of countries. So we were in the American region of Kosovo. There was a Soviet region. There was a Russian region. There was a French area, British, and that might have been it. And then there was several other countries that were represented within those. But these main regions that would. So anyway, we could travel with that badge to the various regions, and it was understood that the overall mission of the entire thing was under UN control, not American.
It mentioned already when the bombing occurred. That's March through June of 1999. By the end of, right after that, UN forces begin to enter Kosovo. and by August 2000, this is almost a year later, the 101st Airborne sent its first deployment. What was your expectations about how much combat you were likely to see?
I didn't think I was going to see any. It was, when we did our training at Fort Polk, the JRTC kind of prep training ahead of time, it was all about crowd control and, if a mob would organize in a certain area, how to maintain peace, and using force would be the last option, and even with force, it was really drilled into us that it was non-deadly force that we should use, if at all possible, and it was basically presented that you are not the enemy or the target. Both sides in this dispute liked America being there because it was dangerous without, or they liked the UN being there because it was dangerous without that central control. And it was not something I was expecting to see any kind of danger or the personal danger. Now it was pretty clear that there is these people may harm each other.
What part of Kosovo did the United States control?
The southeast area. So our camp was called Camp Bonsteel, and I think the city it was closest to was Julan, and it went up almost to Pristina. So it would be this
but not including Pristina.
But not including Pristina. That's true.
What was the name of the town again?
Julan, I believe, is the closest city to where we were.
Okay.
Our camp is called Camp Bonsteel.
GNJIL?
Yeah, we pronounced it Julan.
What was the language there?
You have to ask me that, huh? I think it was Serbian, but I can't really say for sure. I should know better than that. I should have studied this better.
Oh, that's okay. There's no wrong answers when you're answering this stuff. So did you get any kind of language training at all going in?
None at all.
I want you to tell us then about your deployment overseas and arrival in country in as much detail as you can recall, especially your first impressions of getting to Kosovo.
Okay, so we flew into Macedonia, Camp Able Sentry, and this was about...
Direct military flight from the U.S.?
No, that was a surprise. They kind of prepared us for that it would be in a military flight, sitting on kind of the strap seats and all that, and out on the runway is a nice 747 with plush seats, just like in a civilian plane that they chartered, and they had movies and all that. So it was not. It was, and that probably was a pretty good picture of how things went. It was much more cush than what you would expect a deployment to be. There was a couple points. So when I got to Macedonia, they gave us our ammo and we had our weapons already, but they gave us our ammo at that point. We took a bus, and that was about a 4 or 5 hour bus ride to get to Camp Bonsteel from there as a group, and that was probably the least pleasant part, just rough roads and all that. We got to Camp Bonsteel, and there had already been Americans there, and they have an established camp. They're called Sea Huts. I think Southeast Asia is the name of these SEA huts that you stay in, which were built by Brown and Root. It's a civilian company that built these buildings that you'd sleep in and like barracks almost. And then the hospital there at Camp Bonsteel is a tent hospital, but it's almost what you'd consider a permanent structure. They've got heating, air conditioning. These aren't tents that are going to be taken down readily. And the optometry tent is part of that. So that was already all there. The equipment is permanent to the location, so they have optometry clinic already set up. And then the previous rotation of soldiers, I think they're from Fort Stewart, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they had a group of soldiers that were then leaving within the next couple weeks, and we would just take their spots. So there was an optometrist there that they call this right seat ride, left seat ride, which is where you take 1 week and basically follow them in all the things that they do. And for me, the main thing was learning the medevac routines and the emergency procedures for when something happens to make sure that all the protocols are followed right. Right seat ride is when he's doing it for a week and I'm observing. Left seat ride is where we switch, where I'm the doc in charge and he's observing and kind of giving some advice, and that's his last week there, and then he's on his way out. So they have a little overlap to make sure that the transition goes smooth, and he was really nice. It was a really good transition for that. Besides learning the emergency procedures, the other thing that was unique to that trip would be the opt caps. They have med caps and opt caps. Opt being optometry, med being medical, and CAP would be Civilian Assistance Program. And that was probably, from my standpoint, the main purpose besides seeing soldiers was going on these civilian assistance trips. And those, kind of like what you'd consider a short-term mission trip almost being, except part of the military where you'd go and see people. Well, anyway, we did one of those together. And there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of procedures that have to be followed for safety and all that as well. But that was that initial couple weeks. And it was really good. It had a really smooth transition, and for being fairly fresh to being a division soldier, the transition actually on that part, it was really well done, I think. So I jumped right in with my both feet running, I guess.
What was your initial impression of the countryside, what you could assess out of the economy and the people?
It's beautiful. It's really a pretty country. And where we were was close to some mountains, so you could see Big Duke was a mountain that's really close by. You could see from Camp Bondsteel. It's gorgeous, and the people are, they look much like we do, fair-skinned, maybe a little bit darker, but very, very, like their ladies are very pretty. Their men too. They're very nice, friendly people.
Are you talking about the Albanians or the Serbians?
You couldn't tell the difference. You couldn't tell the difference by looking at them. They all look the same. And they couldn't tell each other apart until they asked their names, and then they would know when you heard the last name or even the first name. I think they would know that's a Serbian name or that's an Albanian name, and then it's actually interesting. We'd go to villages for these opt caps, and we would bring a translator. We would intentionally try to bring a translator from the opposite people group to interact with the villagers that we're serving, just to have some kind of, positive interaction between an Albanian and a Serbian, however we could accomplish that. And so that was one of the things that we did. Well, you could see it in their face when they would start talking to the person, and it'd be all good, and find out that they are not of the same group. Whether either side, when they'd find out the translator was from a different, the opposite side, it'd get more icy, and you could sense it pretty quickly. But that's how they found out, was the names. Anyway, the people were very much look like us, except their teeth. I do remember their teeth were all messed up. They don't apparently have good dental care. But other than that, really nice people. I should mention, too, the first 2 weeks we were there, I had brought Sergeant Priest. He was my NCOIC, the officer, the non-commissioned officer in charge of our optometry.
What was his rank?
He was E5. He's just sergeant. Priest, and Specialist Himes, she was the optical fabricator, the one that would make the glasses. So Sergeant Priest would kind of run the clinic from the patient side, appointments and scheduling, and do pre-testing, and kind of like you consider the office manager, and then I would be the doctor, and then Specialist Himes was the maker of the glasses. Well, Sergeant Priest we'd only been there for a couple weeks. He was on the phone with his wife back home, and while he was talking to her on the phone, we had phones. It was really easy for us to call home and all that.
Cell phones?
No, not cell phones, but it was landlines at the tents. Well, anyway, he was talking to Daisy, And she's driving home, and she said their road is blocked off. And so we were talking to her while it's happening, all this. Well, she says, there's a fire on our road. And turns out she realized it was their house was on fire while he's talking to her on the phone. And so he's hearing all this. So that was considered enough reason to send someone home. He had only been there for a couple weeks, and they lost everything in the fire, although no one got hurt. She was out with the kids and driving home, came home to that. And Fort Campbell was really good about supporting them. They did not have renter's insurance, which was not smart, but they had a lot of support from the unit. There were some fundraiser efforts and all that. And he stayed home for, I think it was about 3 weeks or so, and came back in the midst of all that. So that was really early on, and I wasn't sure if he was going to come back or not. And I was only going to be there a little over 3 months myself, so I was kind of hoping that he didn't, because I knew he had a lot going on at home, and I figured it'd probably be quicker to get a replacement than to have him come back. But they did. They sent him back, and that was fine. He did a great job when he came back. So there was a good part of it was just myself and Specialist Himes doing the OPCAP missions, although whenever you go out on the OPCAP, you would bring a whole group of people. It'd be you'd have some military police come, you'd have just anyone that you could round up to just bodies to help kind of sort, signing in people for getting the glasses and all those things sorted out. So we would be the two main ones or the three main ones when he was with us, but then we had a lot of soldiers that would always want to come just because it was their chance to get off the base, see the countryside, and interact with the people as well for a reason. So
I'd always heard that Albania, which is just across the border, was the poorest European country during this time frame. Was Kosovo a really impoverished area as well?
Yes. Yeah. You asked about that. I forgot to answer that. Yeah. It was destitute. There was really nobody seemed to be working, and the houses and you go into the cities and it amazes me people can make it without seeming to have any kind of economy, but there really wasn't a whole lot.
What was the economy based on?
There certainly was agriculture happening, so that probably was a big part of it. You did see you did see some shepherds and those type of things, I guess, but I don't know. I mean, I remember driving through the city, and it seemed like everyone's just kind of outside their house, just kind of looking at us go by, and it seems like they ought to be working. But now, I did in one of our trips that we went out to one of the areas. We did go to a sugar plant, so there was a factory where they made sugar.
Sugar beet sugar, I'm sure.
I'm sure. And so there was some factories, but not a lot. It was really pretty country, but yeah, it was pretty destitute. Definitely third world as they come.
Tell me about, you've gotten into it a little bit, but I want to hear more about what a typical OPCAP mission would be.
Yeah. So this was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed that part the most. You would plan it out ahead of time, and that would all have to be coordinated with our superiors. That we want to. We would say, here's the number that we want to do per week, which was usually 3, I believe, in that range. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But they would then they'd have special forces and all kinds of places where soldiers were going out, and they'd say, here's a school that we think it would work well to do a mission at, or an orphanage, and that was usually the type of things. Or go to, if there's like a small health clinic somewhere, we would maybe go there, and then they would tell that local establishment that on such and such a day we're going to have an optometrist, a dentist, and a primary care doctor come, and that was usually the combination, along with their staff, and so the actual logistics of it, a lot of it was set up by people above myself as far as making the arrangements on the time and location. And they would go ahead of time and make sure that the area was secure and safe. We would, my part of it was to make sure I was stocked sufficiently with glasses and medications. And so we we made a lot of purchases of glasses that, just straight reading glasses, because that's a pretty straightforward thing to get people. But we also had a lot of donated glasses, that kind of like the Lions Club type deal, where had already been sorted, and then we would measure the people at that location and try to match up the closest pair of glasses that we had that would fit them appropriately and adjust it to them and get it to them. And we see usually between 50 and 100 in a day. So it's not doing full exams, it's pretty much measuring their glasses and looking at them. And most of them had an eye concern, to get in line to see us was they weren't seeing something right.
There had to be a lot of people who already had glasses on, weren't there?
Some, but not a lot. Not a lot. There's a lot that needed them. But of the kids, for example, that was the ones that we did the most of, was going to the schools. Of the kids, nobody had glasses that I saw. And a lot of them needed them, just like in America. So, yeah, there was going to the schools, and there was those moments, and I don't know if, the first time you put on glasses, if you remember that, but there were those moments of, that kids, like the first time they'd seen the world in some ways, and saw a lot of that. And I think anyone that's been on a third world medical mission trip, they've experienced those moments that, wow, this, as simple as it is to us, it probably changed that kid's life, or at least for a while, got them so they can see, and that's amazing to think, that there are kids out there that just flat out can't see, but glasses would do it for them. But there's a lot that fit that category.
Any other optometry-related issues that you encountered quite a bit?
Well, so I saw the soldier on my other days at Camp Bondsteel. I saw soldiers pretty much, I was the only optometrist in our region, the American region. So Camp Bondsteel was the main hospital. There were other camps in the American area, but no other optometrists or eye doctors at all.
So this brigade from the 101st is not the only American unit there?
I don't know the answer to that. The 101st, that 50 Deuce, once they got there, they weren't all at Camp Bondsteel. They went to various places. And then there were several other countries represented in the American region too. So I think they were the main brigade there, and I think they covered most of the American sector, but there was also others that were there. But I don't know if there were many other Americans in that area besides the 50 Deuce.
Does that mean you saw some UN troops as well?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So we at the hospital, that was staffed by, it was like a melting pot of different countries that were staffing the hospital. And it seemed like especially the medical part of it was very diverse on the countries represented there, which was really neat, working with, we had UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates. We had British, we had French. That's probably the main ones I can think of. And they were all part of that hospital, and so interacting with each other, and they all spoke English. So English was the language, but you had walkie-talkies to talk to each other, saying, "I need you to show up here or there," whatever. All the different types of, you can tell by their tone of they're speaking what language they're coming from, or what country, but they're all speaking English pretty well. So anyway, I saw soldiers mostly. I had pretty early on. She was a UN police officer that was there in our region, and she had broken glass that had ruptured her eye. So she had thrown away some glass, and a shard from the throwing it away, had shot up and penetrated her eye. And to have a full thickness penetration is really dangerous, and the cornea is really pretty solid, so it had to take quite a hit to get all the way through. But
so what portion of the eyeball did
that's the front surface. So you look at the dark part of your eye, there's actually a clear coating that goes over your iris, and that's called your cornea. So
that's where it had penetrated.
It had penetrated all the way through, and it was leaking aqueous, which is the kind of the water that fills the front of your eye. It was leaking out. So when they had gotten her to our hospital, you put dye in there, and you can actually see the fluid leaking out of that wound, so it's a full thickness wound. And the eye was filling with blood on the inside, and it's just beyond my expertise or my training to fix that. It needed surgery, and I'm not an eye surgeon. So we patched her eye. We covered it up, put medication on it, antibiotics, and then just covered it. And then I went through the process of trying to get her to medevac. And Landstuhl, Germany, was where you would take and medevac soldiers. And I probably medevaced 5 or 6 during those few months I was there. Not a lot, because most things you can handle. Very few that are emergencies. Well, anyway, she had bad luck because that night the air base in Skopje, Macedonia, was under mortar attack, so they had shut down the all flights in and out of Skopje. And so they had no other means of getting her to Landstuhl, and they didn't know how long it was going to be shut down. And this is one that you don't want to just sit on, because if it gets infected in the inside, she loses her eye. Well, she had a PA that kind of was her medical representative. So the UN military, UNMIK, UN mission in Kosovo, is what she was part of. They had a PA that kind of represented them for their general medical care. Anyway, he came with her. Well, I said that she needs surgery, and we need to get her to a surgeon. And the major that was from Britain, that was in our hospital, he said, I was in Pristina, and I met a Russian surgeon, eye surgeon, that's in Pristina, and Pristina would be under the Russian control. And I said, well, that's great. If he's an eye surgeon, let's go, and I'll go with her. And the PA said, no, we don't want a Russian to take care of her. Well, I said, someone's got to, and it's not going to be, I'm not going to sew her eye up. So eventually he relented, and we got her to Pristina, and I went with her on that medevac flight, which was neat. So I got to meet a Russian doctor. Dr. Dmitry was his name, and he actually teaches at a medical school in Leningrad, eye surgery. So a very qualified individual, really nice guy. And he met us, and it was the middle of the night, and he met us, and just put a couple sutures on her cornea. This was no big deal to him, and I was filling with blood, so he agreed we need to get her on for further care, but for the emergency part, he got her sewed closed. And he was just so excited to have us come there, and American bring someone to him, and it was really a good experience. And a couple days later, maybe the next week, he shows up down in our sector. He shows up at my clinic unannounced. I mean, we didn't know he was coming, and he came with his contingent of his staff and checked out our hospital and everything. And then he made a couple more trips down to see us from Pristina. Spent a day seeing patients with me, and just kind of interacted together. He brought some Russian uniforms to me and things like that, and I gave him American things that he was real excited about, military things, uniform type stuff. And he told me if we ever get to Leningrad, I need to look him up, which I have not done.
But you thought about?
I think it'd be great, yeah. He's an older guy. I don't know, he may be retired by now, but I'm sure he's still there. Yeah, really friendly, neat guy. So that would be kind of neat to go there sometime. I'm sure he'd show me around. So we only probably saw each other a total of 5 times, I'd say, but definitely struck up a friendship in that short period.
What was the original reluctance to go to a Russian doctor?
I think that PA felt that it would be substandard care, which is really, very ridiculous. This guy was top quality, and yet I don't know if he was concerned about the language barrier or the actual quality, but I think he was concerned, thinking that Russia is maybe in his mind more dirty or something like that. I don't know, but he was very opposed to it, and that it was a wrong choice to not let her go, but he changed his mind.
Well, how old was the PA?
He was young, probably between 25 and 30.
The only reason I asked is because, of course, the Soviet Union had been our traditional enemy for a long, long time.
Sure.
This wasn't that many years beyond that.
Yeah, and that may have played into it a little bit as well. But medical is so different. And around the world, I don't think there's any doctor that's a doctor soldier that looks at it as that has any qualms about treating someone of the other side. medically and doing a good job with it.
For the local population, were there some other vision issues that they had?
Yeah, well, there was a lot, and just like anywhere you go, there's vision problems. So you'd see all the same things that we see in America, more untreated things. So glaucoma is one that's really frustrating because glaucoma requires ongoing care, and you'd see it a lot, and yet to give them a medicine to help lower their eye pressure is not very beneficial if they're not going to be able to continue to get it. So that's a very frustrating one. It's kind of like blood pressure, high blood pressure, that if you knew someone has high blood pressure and could have a heart attack if it's not maintained, but you only have a 2-month supply of the medicine, it's harder to make that decision on what do you do if you don't think they're going to be able to keep getting it. And we're dealing with large numbers of people and logistics of. So one thing that I was probably my best thing that I was able to do over there, looking back, and at the time it seemed like it was important, but looking back, I think it was probably the best thing that happened during that time was I met in I think it was Sturpsey. Yeah, Sturpsey is the city. Another surgeon, eye surgeon. We did one of our op caps was at a health clinic in Sturpsey, and it was like set up just like a primary care clinic. So they didn't really have anything except like a chair to sit on, examination chair, and they would use like flashlights and stuff for looking in people's eyes, and it was very primitive. Well, one of the doctors there had lost his position. He had been teaching at a hospital in Pristina, the capital. And again, very qualified. And his name, it started with an M, I think it was Mitrovic or something like that. I should remember that. But anyway, I found out he's an eye surgeon that taught at a university hospital in Pristina. So again, really intelligent man. And he kind of, when we came in and we was doing all of our stuff, and you're like a celebrity there. He came in just observing and talking with him and all that. And I realized that I'm talking to basically a guy that's qualified as a university professor in eye surgery and very gifted, and he's got no tools in that clinic. And so it's like having Picasso without any paint, So when we went back, I got all their information. When we went back, I talked with our recruiters, or not our recruiters, our superiors and people that were in charge of logistics about seeing if we could get him equipment. And we were able to, with some grants, we were able to supply him with the slit lamp exam, the chair, all that goes into just running a basic clinic. You already have someone that's local, that understands the language and trained, and he just didn't have the resources to do his job. And so that was, again, like I said, assuming, I know the money all went through and it was all approved. I never got to go back because it was, it would have happened after I left as far as getting all that to him. But last I know was that everything was going through with him getting equipment to actually have that place outfitted with being able to do his job. And the need is endless, so his number of patients would be unlimited.
Before it just didn't exist at all, or it got.
It was just a building that he was with a couple other doctors there, and it was just a building, and because of all the unrest and everything, he just had to leave his position in Pristina, and so they just were at this place, and he could prescribe medicine and he could do some just rudimentary things, but any doctor is going to be fairly handcuffed if they don't have equipment to do their job right. And so that was his situation, which is, I'm sure there's a lot of others like that around third world countries where there's people that are able to serve the population, they just don't have the resources. And looking back, I wish we had been able to hook up with more like that. The op caps are good. They're more feel good at that point in time because you're doing an immediate handout and here you go, here's glasses that will help you, which is nice. But it doesn't compare with getting a doctor that actually lives there and is going to stay up and running to see patients himself.
Were you allowed to make prescriptions?
Yes, we. Yeah. So we made glasses for soldiers, and yes, there were some times that we made glasses in rare cases for the locals that we would get their measurements and we had nothing close to it, and we'd go back and make them glasses and have one or two convoys go out and deliver them to the right place. And that was under the radar. That was not approved for government to actually make, or at least for the military to make glasses for them.
You weren't supposed to be doing that?
We weren't supposed to be doing that. Using that equipment and all that was all because you give them frames that belong to the BCGs that belong to the military. So they weren't okay with that, but
who's they? You mean
they meaning the rules in place.
But you're there for humanitarian purposes.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a slippery slope, though. When you start talking about using military resources to make something for a civilian, there's that risk of trades or various things that maybe could happen that are beyond the government's control. So they were okay with us purchasing or getting Lions donated glasses or purchasing reading glasses and handing those out, but for some reason it crossed a line to make glasses custom for an individual person. But there were times that we just had to. It was the right thing to do. So.
Did anybody up the chain of command challenge you in that?
No.
Did they wink and nod and say, yeah, that's the right thing to do?
I don't even know if they were aware. We were very autonomous, and actually everything I've done and did in the military, both in Iraq and in Kosovo, I had a lot of freedom on those type of things where there wasn't much oversight. As long as we didn't cause trouble, as long as we did our job, there wasn't a whole lot of someone looking over my shoulder saying, why are you doing that? And I think maybe partly being a doctor, there's always that you don't want to look. Maybe some people would feel like I don't want to sound stupid to ask what's that piece of equipment for? What are you doing there? So just he knows what he's doing. I'll let him do it. And so there was definitely a lot of freedom for me, and maybe more so than most of the soldiers. So.
How about prescription of drugs?
Only we couldn't write a prescription, or we never did write a prescription for them to fill in a local pharmacy. I don't know. Looking back, maybe that would have been a good way to do it, but we handed out. So we had donations that, like Pfizer would then donate and ship large amounts to us to hand out. You'd have to keep writing different grants and different companies and say, this is what I'm going through. Can you keep us stocked? And they did. So that was a big part of what we did, is just kind of getting all the donations all sorted and in the right places.
But you're not writing prescriptions, but you have drugs available to distribute?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I'm making the connection there. So somebody comes in, they have a problem with glaucoma, then you hand them some medication?
Mm-hmm. But we did not write a prescription. See, I wasn't licensed as a Kosovo doctor, so maybe that's why, but I wouldn't write a prescription that they would hand carry to their pharmacy. That wasn't part of what we did.
Did you have a lot of people who had no idea they had glaucoma, for just as an example?
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know. There are probably much better ways that things could be done. I was there a few months, and you just do, this is how you do it, and that kind of goes back to that right seat ride, left seat ride. This is the protocol, this is how we do it.
Those might be two different things.
Yes, they could be two different things, but I didn't rock the boat much on those type of things. This is the procedures, and I'm as far as those things would go, I can bend the rules a little bit for certain things, but if this is how we're going to do it, then that's pretty much how I'm going to do it. So.
What were the rest of the troops in the 101st Airborne doing? I mean, the lion's share, we're talking about infantry troops. It's
yes.
Different kind of mission than NCAP's going on.
Yeah, it was mostly police type work. It was going to areas and just almost just watching over like the police force to make sure that unrest wasn't getting out of hand.
How about units that might have a better function for humanitarian purposes, like engineer units or supply.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'd forgotten about that. There were several that were working on. That was some of the main projects going on. Was improving the power supplies, improving the roads. I know there were several that were working on water supplies and purification, and making sure that they had those kind of infrastructure things up and running. So we really acted a lot like a government, in a lot of ways, with the police control, the roads and infrastructure, those type of things. It was more like you were the Kosovo government in some ways, the NATO troops.
Were there civil affairs units on the ground as well?
Yeah.
Were they working with the local authorities to reestablish some kind of government?
Yeah, they were working with it. I didn't really have much eyes on that. I know that they were there, and I saw a lot of them. They had, I think, pretty important jobs to do, but I don't know how far they got, and I don't really even know where Kosovo is at this point as far as if they've made any progress on stability or not. My guess is they probably never will be able to get along well with each other while I'm alive.
Some of the things that led up to what was going on with the disintegration of Yugoslavia was ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
Sure you remember that phrase. A little bit of that going on in what was Kosovo. You said the minority population were Serbs and the majority are Albanians. Was there ethnic cleansing? It'd be simpler if all the Albanians would move one place and all the Serbs would move another.
Yeah, it wasn't going to happen though. And they just both feel deep inside that the other one needs to just leave. So it wasn't really, it didn't seem like it was a consideration of, it's just all or nothing in their minds, it seemed like. And it really runs deep. Going to the schools, you've been to schools where they have like kids put the pictures that they've colored on the walls, and these are elementary schools. It's striking. We saw this where you walk into a school and pretty much every picture, there was a few that were maybe like flowers or countryside, but over 90% of the colored pictures that these kids were drawing were of a soldier or a shooting, a gun, violence in these pictures that they're drawing, and it's ingrained in them. I think the anger and the hatred is really ingrained in them. When I did these OpCaps, you'd always, each time you'd go, you'd get some random story that they're trying to convince you that the other side's the bad guys. And I remember plainly, so we got the interpreter there, and I asked, "How are your eyes?" And this lady who, I wasn't asking her life story, she says ever since this all happened, and she tells me this long story about how she was with her family, and that men came in with weapons and actually killed her husband, and terrible story, all this right in front of her with her kids. Well, that wasn't what I was asking, but she, you would get that where they would try to convince you that they're just the innocents in all this battle, and the other side is the evil ones that are, and you get it on either side. So this was so rooted into their stories of that they tell their families and all these things how bad they are. We're just trying to protect ourselves, and they're out trying to kill us, and they just all they want is us to be dead, and yet the other side feels the same way, that we're just trying to live our lives, and they're trying to kill us. And so you get these messages from either side, and there's, I'm sure, half-truths to all of it. So, I don't know.
Having encountered that, then what's your opinion about why we're here? Does that cause you to question it at all?
Yeah. Well, I definitely felt that no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to change the hatred. Maybe it's hard to know. I'm sure people would have thought that about blacks and whites in America, that we can never get past the hatred, and I would dispute that now. You go back in 60s and earlier, and you would think that there's never going to be a neighborhood where you'd have black, white house back and forth next to each other, and people get along. And I know there's still racism, but it's different and not nearly at the level that it used to be. And I think the majority of people that were raised in the 70s or later in America don't have much of that at all. I mean, maybe some lingering from their families, but mostly I think we've gotten past a lot of that in America. So I guess maybe it is possible, but boy, it's...
Now, you might not be in a position to answer this question, but where do you think the hatred is coming from? Is it something that is just immersed in the culture, or is it something that even at the grade school level the kids are learning from their teachers, or is it a factor of what they hear in the churches and mosques?
I think it's just, my own opinion is just throughout the whole culture. Everything. Everything about them is really anti the other side. So I think it's really deep. And I did not get the impression that it was coming from the religious organizations, and that's kind of what I was halfway expecting, but I don't think that's the case, that it's being, anger and hatred is necessarily being preached from the religious leaders, which I do think is the case a lot of times in Middle Eastern Muslim churches, I guess, or temples, that I think it is being preached religiously, but I did not get that impression in Kosovo.
Do you have any other incidents that kind of illustrate this tension that existed, this hatred that existed between the groups?
Yeah, I guess I don't, Mark. I think that probably those are the ones I can think of the most. And I wasn't there very long, too. You know, I was only there for a few months or so.
When you were out on these NCAP missions, I guess you call it OPCAP missions,
yeah.
Did you have a chance where they would bring you in and feed you a meal, or get exposed to some of the culture and traditions that they had?
Definitely, yeah. They treated us like celebrities, and they definitely wanted us to join in to their whatever they had going on at the time. We'd usually, after we were done with the kids, we'd play soccer with them or things like that, and and they did feed us.
What was the menu?
It was good. I remember there was like flatbread usually, and some kind of sloppy meat, and I don't know. I like almost any kind of food, but it was fine. I thought it was pretty neat. We went to some restaurants when we were out on the missions, which we weren't supposed to. So I did break a few rules, but we would go and say, okay, well, let's stop there, and we'd pull up all of our convoy and eat there at the restaurant just to experience it. So it always felt so safe, and we were so well armed, and we were never no one ever would even yell at us. I mean, it was just everywhere you'd go, you were kind of a celebrity. You know, I almost felt like, you know, if you're maybe like a famous person here in America, like everywhere you go, people are waving and smiling, and so I did not sense the tensions unless if you actually get to talk to people one-on-one, and then you would sense the tension, but did not witness violence against each other or anything like that.
So stopping by and going into our restaurant, how would they treat you? How would the proprietors treat you?
Great. Yeah, they treat you really nicely. Yeah.
Would they let you pay?
We did pay. Yeah, we did. But, you know, I think every culture has some of that where they, you know, no. But no, we always would. We were, I think Americans, and probably all the countries there, understood that you're there to kind of somehow just promote happiness, if it's possible. And so, you know, if you're going to a restaurant or playing soccer, but any of these things, they want you there and they want you to be happy. And Camp Bondsteel is, in itself, it's so nice. I mean, to call it a deployment, there's a movie theater. The workout center is really well set up. They had a Burger King. I don't know if they had a Taco Bell. They had their DFAC, or their dining facility, is like what you think of maybe Golden Corral. It's just a buffet, and it's really nice setup as far as all the fruit and cut fruit and meats and salad bars, and it was not anything difficult as far as the living setup.
You're in Kosovo, which is predominantly Muslim. Was there any restrictions on alcohol or on practicing your religious faith?
Well, you cannot drink alcohol as a soldier when you're deployed, so that wasn't even an option.
So there was no alcohol in the PX, and did they have an officers' club? Or
They did not have an officers' club, and there was a PX, and there was no alcohol in the PX. The only alcohol would be if somehow someone went out to the city and got some.
So the local communities had alcohol?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's a big part of their culture. Yeah. Or if someone...
The Albanians as well as the Serbs?
I don't really remember it being an issue. I didn't look for it. I'll drink a little bit. It was never something that was a big deal to me anyway.
Okay.
So but sure, there were some soldiers that their wives would relabel things that were sent to them, those type of things too. But yeah, anyway, alcohol was not an option. Practicing your religion, we had chapel there on Camp Bonsteel, and where we'd worship. We even went to a Serbian Catholic, Orthodox church a couple times, and that was really neat too, and worshiped with them.
What struck you about the Orthodox service?
It was what I expected for the most part. It's any Catholic or traditional worship to me is very formal and very regimented, and it's in that same vein. They did have the incense and all that, and those things are not really important to my faith or part of what we believe, but I don't really have a problem with that being part of the worship service either, so it was fine.
Did you ever sense any resentment from either Serbs or Albanians about the United States or the UN forces being there?
Did not at all. Never sensed that.
Did that surprise you?
Well, they told me that's how it was going to be. I guess I kind of thought maybe the Serbs would be the only ones that would want us there because they're so outnumbered, and the Albanians, I thought, would probably want us to leave so they could go ahead and wipe out the Serbs. But I did not sense that. I think they both liked the peace, but they were willing to break the peace if we were going to.
It sounds like neither side was anxious to have the UN forces leave.
True. I don't think either one wants us to leave. Yeah. They
Okay.
just want the other side to leave.
I understand President Bush came to visit while you were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a surprise. We didn't really know until like a couple days ahead of time he was coming, and that was the only time that we had to go around unarmed. So that was kind of strange after having had weapons. We couldn't have our ammo with us at that point. They said basically what they said was that the president's own security detail would handle if something happened. They didn't trust American soldiers enough to be armed in the presence of the president. So we, being soldiers, we had to go through, a checkpoint and all that just to go to see him. But yeah, it was pretty neat. He came and he talked and gave a little motivational talk, and he ran. I think he did a run with a group of soldiers, and yeah, definitely kind of brightened the mood.
Did you get to shake his hand or get close to him?
I was in the audience, halfway close to me. I could see him, as if, but there was a lot of people that came out for that, and no, I did not shake his hand.
Were the soldiers pretty pumped that the commander-in-chief was there?
Yeah, he definitely had a connection with the soldiers. I think, the physical fitness part of it, he's kind of a rah-rah type of guy. You could see him being comfortable with a weapon in his hand, and it wouldn't be a surprise. So he was, yeah, it was all positive as far as people having him out there. There's very few soldiers that at that point were not fans of his, and that was early on. He had just been elected, so things hadn't started to go sour with the media and all that. As far
We'll
as,
get to that
yeah.
in a later chapter.
he was pretty well accepted at that point.
Well, I wanted to spend some time having you discuss keeping in touch with home, with the home front, and what's going on at home, because you had to be torn in that respect with what's going on with the situation you left.
Yeah. There's no doubt that Kim had it. You know, we think of deployments and how hard it is for being soldiers and gone, and yeah, it wasn't for me. I mean, from the standpoint of my life, it was kind of doing fun things, going out in the countryside, doing these missions, and then when I got back, I'd work out, watch a movie, and go to the DFAC, and I'd play cards, and we played video games. So it was more like a vacation, and it was a beautiful area. So yeah, I kind of felt guilty about it because Kim is at home. She had her cousin that was in high school that as soon as she finished up the school year, came and lived with her, and my mom had been to help out too, I think, for a week or so. And she's, we talked to each other on the phone a lot. I had a phone access I could call any time, which was really neat. So she was telling me about when she'd go shopping that Nikki's pushing her in a wheelchair, and then she's pushing Logan in a stroller, and then they're, somehow in all of that, they're gathering up their groceries, so they're like a train going through the grocery store.
Well, how long after you left did she give birth then?
I left beginning of May, and
this
Faith,
is 2001.
2001, and Faith's birthday is July 26th. So May, June, July, almost 3 months.
What's her name again?
Faith is our daughter. Yep. And she was on bed rest for the first, I guess, almost 2 months of that. And then towards the end, it was fine. Of course, once she got off bed rest, they said, now it's fine if the baby comes. Baby didn't come that quickly. So who knows if it was really necessary to be on bed rest the whole time or not. But anyway, she was okay. Right before I left, we did a ultrasound where we wanted to find out together if it was going to be a boy or girl so we could name it and all that, name our child. And with our son, we had waited till he was born. And the excitement, it's a boy, it's a girl. Well, since we were pretty sure I was not going to be there when this one came, we decided to find out together. So we found out ahead of time it was going to be a girl. This was before all that had gone down with her early contractions. So we'd already named her and everything ahead of time. And so anyway, during the summer, she was kind of cooped up inside, and our son, who was pretty active, was maybe a little bit stifled because I had been always the roughhouser with him, and Nikki wasn't much into those things, and Kim couldn't. So his life changed a lot, and of course his life changed a lot more when his sister came around too. So
how old was he at the time?
He was almost 2, I believe. Yeah,
almost to the terrible 2s.
Yeah, he was a good kid, and he still is a good kid. But yeah, a lot. He became a lot harder to handle for her around that time, and some of it was due to me being gone. Some of it was due, I think, to the excitement about the new baby coming and all that, and just his age, So he definitely became much more effort for her, and yet, anyway.
How did you keep in touch?
Mostly by phone. We emailed back and forth quite a bit. There was... They were just working on, they'd set this up as video teleconferencing thing, which was really neat. Nowadays it doesn't seem so amazing with, phones and that have video and all that, but back then that was really amazing. They scheduled a time for a soldier to sit in a room, and they would then get the family at that same time in America and hook it up through satellite somehow so that you could have a video teleconference with each other. So I did that twice, and she brought Logan with her, and it was really hard for her. He was not really quite understanding that I wasn't there close by because he was real excited about it all, but then when it was over, he kept walking around behind the TV, looking for me type thing, and so it was pretty neat to be able to kind of see each other and talk rather than just over the phone and talk. And, it was not like we were short on communication because of the phone stuff, the email. There was really no limit on how much I could get to a point of being able to communicate with her, unlike when I got to Iraq where that got all different. But
Tell me about the actual getting the news or the process of Faith being born.
So I knew that she had gone to the hospital and that it was okay now to have a baby as far as she was far enough along. A friend of ours, Angie Clark, had kind of been her birth coach, I guess, so kind of went with her to the hospital. Angie's husband is Kelly, and we'll probably get to him later, but he's a dentist that was in the military with me at the same time. And so I knew they were there, and they, for them to call me, so it's kind of a one-way communication as far as the phone goes. They couldn't just call us. So it's, I'd try to call and see what was going on. And I think, I should remember this better, but I think I found out by email when Faith came. And that still wasn't enough reason to go home, but I was going to be going home within, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. So it was the end of July, and I was supposed to be home, I think, by August 20th. And so we got the news. She's healthy and born, and everything was good. They had gone home, 2 or 3 days after Faith was born, and Faith got a fever, and she was like 102 fever, and that was within a week of the birth. So they ended up going back to the hospital, and it ended up being, they call it fever of unknown origin. They never really knew what caused the fever. But at that age, with a baby having that high of a fever, they were concerned. I guess meningitis was the big concern. And so I knew they were back at the hospital. I knew it was a fever, and Kim had mentioned meningitis as a possibility. And Keith Baxter, which was the internist, he was my roommate in Kosovo, well, he had some inside connections where he was able to talk to the actual doctors at Fort Campbell's hospital to get the reports as they were happening, kind of. So it was really good to have him at that point, because he was able to get the information to me about as quick as Kim got the information on how the tests were and how things were, and if she was going to be okay and everything. And it turned out she was fine. But it was maybe a little tense during that time. And again, Kim felt that was enough reason for me to just come home too.
We're getting pretty close to the time when you need to have to pull the plug, but let's get you home.
Okay. So Dr. Gerald was the other optometrist with the 101st. He was going to take the second half of my of that tour that the 50 Deuce had to cover with the 101st. So he came. There was some hang-ups with him coming into Kosovo. Some with his orders weren't written properly, so we didn't get to do the right seat ride, left seat ride with him. But it didn't matter, because Sergeant Priest and Specialist Himes, who ran my clinic, they were staying the whole time. So bringing a new doctor in is just basically taking out one piece of the puzzle and putting a new piece in, but we had a staff that had the continuity. So I didn't see him in country, I don't believe, at all. We left and arrived about the same time rather than having that planned 2-week overlap, but it was fine. So flew back, went through Germany, and I was the only one. So as I mentioned, when I was going down to Macedonia and Kosovo, it was part of a huge group. I was the only one going back home at that time. The rest of the 50 Deuce and everyone would stay in. So it took civilian flights surrounded by international people. And
how did you get from out of Kosovo? Where did you stop first?
Camp Able Sentry, so went back down to Macedonia, and then caught a flight there, and that's a major airport, and went from there, I believe, to Germany. It might have been Landstuhl, and then flew back to, it might have been Detroit. I can't remember where I landed in America, and then from there back to Nashville. But it was all civilian flights all along the way, so it was kind of nice, actually.
Well, how much do you remember about the actual moment of meeting the family?
Oh, seeing the family. They came to the airport, and they were there at the hangar, and Kim she's amazing. In spite of having all the stuff to worry about at home, they had signs and all kinds of video cameras running and all that stuff, and and I wasn't gone all that long, but it was really neat, actually, and seeing my daughter for the first time, and Logan too, and he was just all smiles, and that was pretty neat. And it was the same way when I came back from Iraq too. But there's people that don't even know you that are like clapping, at the airport, and that's pretty cool, actually.
Well, we're at the point here we can either stop here or the next subject. It's not too much longer after you get back. You're back in August of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And September 11th is just down the road. So do we want to pick up with this at the next time we start?
Yeah, we probably should. So we'll just get to that next one.
Okay.
Next time.
Another teaser. Thanks very much, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.